Won't you lend your lungs to me? Mine are collapsing. Plant my feet and bitterly breathe up the time that's passed. Breath I'll take and breath I'll give. Pray the day's not poised. Stand among the ones that live in lonely indecision.
Hello, James.
Hello, Lynn.
It's February 20th, and we're taping episode 27.
Oh, congratulations.
This is the Crackpot Podcast with LaFond and Lockhart. Today, James, I wanted to talk about current event. Not necessarily directly, but I want to talk about this latest school shooting. It was in Parkland, Florida. 17 people died. The young man who did it was taken alive. He was a former student of the school. And there are a lot of details that we don't really need to go over. There are a lot of strange things in this case. I know people will have alternate views of what happened and why. But what I wanted to talk about with you today, I wanted to start by asking you for practical advice for students and parents if someone should find themselves in this kind of situation. But then I want to move on to talking about some of the larger issues and how this fits into a lot of your writing about civilization and masculinity. How we have outsourced childcare to the government and education to the government in a similar way that you have pointed out that we have outsourced violence and defense and things like that. So with that, I want to ask you to see if you can give any kind of practical tips or advice to someone who finds himself warehoused in a large and soft target, such as a school.
Okay, this is pretty simple, and this is something that you should tell all your children. Anytime you go into a public place, you look for the exit, and you get as close to the exit as you can. When I attended school, I spent most of my time daydreaming and hoping that, a war party of Mohawk warriors would come into the room and they would, cut the teacher's head off, and they would begin scalping all the sissies. And thinking about this, I soon came to the conclusion, they would mark me as a sissy too, and I would get scalped. So I will, just on the off chance that my deepest desire came true, and a group of Mohawks teleported into the future and started slaughtering domesticated humans, I should sit by the back door, which is usually in the back left-hand corner of the classroom. Now, in a bigger school, at least half of the classroom seating is on the second floor. I have a friend that, he was insane, but he was a very competent man, and when he was denied custody of his children and couldn't get visitation, he climbed the side of the Hazelwood Elementary School. And he went in through the window, and he took his children out through the window. And he hung out the window, and they hung from his hand, and he dropped them 10 feet. And you can drop and roll from 10 feet. It's the kind of thing that a lot of kids in my generation did just for fun. So as long as you're not up on the third story, you can go out through the window, and you can drop and roll and get out that way. A friend of mine jumped from his second-story apartment when two home invaders came in, one with a knife, one with a gun, and bound him and were going to execute him. He broke away and just dove out the window. He sprained his ankle, but he did it, and he was a 250-pound guy. So you always want to know where your egress is, where your exit is. That's number one. Number two is you've got to be really selective about whether or not you're going to help anybody else. You can't try to help the entire group. If you help the entire group, you will end up like the two male teachers who were killed in this incident trying to defend the children. No woman's going to eat a bullet for anybody except for her child.
Her own children.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just not in her DNA. So the teacher's not going to help you out. The male teachers, unless it's a gym teacher or a coach, he's not going to be worth anything either.
There were three of them. 3 men died. No women died.
Okay, and they're probably the only 3 guys in the school that were heterosexual. So, and that does have something to do with it. I don't have anything against gay guys because they make available a larger proportion of desirable females to me, but they tend to have female instincts. And I have noticed in the schooling of my children that most of the male teachers were obviously gay. And these types of people will behave like women in a situation like this. So you either want to be sitting near a friend who you can depend on, which probably doesn't exist at a high school level, and unless you're in a ghetto and he's your buddy that you do crime with. There's a lesson to be learned there. Or you want to try to hover around the girl that you want to make time with, and if something happens, try to save her. This is going to happen. You're going to have a school shooting. I think at least seasonally, you'll have a mass school shooting in the United States from here on out on a seasonal basis for various reasons.
Yeah, I think the question in my mind is why doesn't it happen more often? Because you have these situations which are large, soft targets, and a recipe for creating disaffected young men, and it's just amazing that it doesn't happen more.
Well, it's been happening more often recently. And I have a theory about why this might be so, but you described it correctly. The school system it's the next to the last stage in total emasculation. Civilization is a machine that eats souls. That's what it does. And the soul that's going to give you a hard way to go is the masculine soul. So you have to make sure you eradicate that. You have to make sure you eradicate masculinity before you can take the humanity out of everybody and just make them into a beastly animal that's going to be easily controlled through their gross desires. This is why I think you're going to see more of this. I believe that what you have are cells of deep state agents that are checking databases of children that are reported as having psychological problems by school nurses or school guidance counselors and contacting them sometimes after they've been released from the school prison system to do various things. I think a lot of these mass killings that we've had over the past year were probably the result of a government agent that gets in contact with somebody who's disturbed and acting as a mentor points them in a way that will justify their darkest impulses and makes the lesson for us that we need more government and we need less ability to defend ourselves in order to be safe from these kind of people. And I think there's no accident that this has been accelerated in the Trump administration. Trump has probably been in office for more mass killings than any other president, and he's only been in for about a year. So I would say that this is in part of it is just an ongoing program for our domestication, but part of it has to be the deep state holding his feet to the fire and letting him know that if he cares so much about the American people, he might want to play ball with them so this stuff doesn't continue, because he doesn't want to go down in history as the president that has overseen the slaughter of more U.S. civilians on American soil than any other president. And he's headed for that.
I think you're right that the government, they groom these disturbed individuals. I think the drugs play a part. I don't know if it's confirmed if this guy was on whatever prescription drugs, but it's very common. But
the drugs are pre-existing. The drugs are a part of the precondition for this. I was just Skyping with Carbon Mike, who's a fellow that's setting up his own podcasts, and the idea that you can go through school and only know 1, 2, or 3 people who don't get high.
Yeah.
That's what it was. That's what it was for me. I had a very small circle of friends because the people that got high didn't want to hang out with anybody who didn't get high. When you see that kind of saturation over generations, as far as school generations go, I was many generations behind this, then you actually have a long tradition of having a highly drugged student body. And then there's the drugs that they're given by the suggestion of the school system, which is okayed by their pediatrician.
The prescription drugs add into that. What I was thinking of earlier was that you said the government grooms these individuals and then maybe triggers them or maybe just waits. But we were talking about it when we were talking about conspiracies, and I think we were talking about JFK, and you said it doesn't really matter who does the assassination as long as the other players are ready. In that case, it was Johnson, right? Lyndon Johnson. Right. And in this case, it's this really creepy crew of kids who are in front of the cameras calling for gun control, who supposedly just saw their classmates gunned down, and now they're polished up and ready to be on camera. Whether or not it was intentional or set up by some government agency, these kids were unquestionably ready for this.
I would say that this one was not a case where this kid was groomed by government agents, although I think we've had other cases in the recent past. And I say that because on the first day of the killing, he was a Latino or a Hispanic. And then on the second day after the killing, he was a white Latino or Hispanic. So the talking points didn't go out as early as they usually go. So this looks like the deep state's got a 1-day lag in managing this. If he had actually been groomed, like the kid that killed the elderly black people in the church, then the talking points would have been prepared right there, bam, ready to go. And they wouldn't have had to change the kid's identity or anything like they did with this recent guy. So I think in this case, you're seeing the fact that the deep state can harness this immediately for their own purposes. And you might believe, some of my readers probably do, that the school district was probably targeted because there was a high level of liberal parents in the school district that would encourage and support their children to get closure by resorting to activism and doing what these kids are doing. You don't have to select an area where you have a lot of liberals like Sandy Hook, because what's going to happen if you have the disaffection of the individual male teenager is going to be greatest in a liberal setting where all the parents have sold out and have given their children to the state, where there's a very slim Christian conservative presence, and all you've got is these liberals with a smattering of libertarians. Then you're going to see this is just going to happen more often, because there's more alienation for the masculine soul when he's stuck in a setting where the parents of most of the people in the area have a liberal worldview. So you're going to see more of this in affluent schools. We had a copycat in a relatively affluent high school in Baltimore County. The next day it was a BB gun. But you're going to see more of this in affluent areas because you're going to have a higher percentage of liberal-thinking parents, and that's either going to make it a clean place to do a deep state setup like a FEMA exercise and have your crisis actors there, and it'll also make it more likely that a random youth will be extremely disaffected because there's very little masculinity in the adult sphere for him to look up to or even seek out for counsel or advice.
And this is something that goes along with the topic that I want, because I'll tell you now, ultimately, my answer to this is that public schools should be abolished, and we already agreed on that.
That's right. The female teachers will be remanded to my custody until they're retrained.
Oh, those are the details I'm not concerned with. That's not my business. I have my own kids to educate, I mean, this is the point, right? Women stay home and take care of kids. That's kind of the normal way. Women, instead of looking after their kids, go to work, drive down wages for men, turn workplaces into a nightmare for men. My friend just got fired from his job for discriminating against a pregnant woman, which he didn't do, but she had been keeping notes on him the entire time and got him fired. And so
that's the replacement of hierarchy with a pecking order. And that's what you're seeing all across the society.
But anyway, this would be a much more sensible way to organize society, to have men outside the house working, women with their kids at home, and not even at home. You can take your kids out and about and teach them all sorts of things, and older kids can go to work with dad. And I don't think this is any shock to your listeners that I feel like that.
Are you suggesting that the 10,000 years of experience that our forebears have with raising children in a civilized setting is superior to what we've been doing for the past 100 years? I mean, really? Could 100 generations of our ancestors, could their collective wisdom possibly equal what our parents thought up, relatively speaking, last week?
Yeah. I'm willing to give it a shot. I know it's risky. And it's funny because I think there's some generational divide here as well, where I get a lot of resistance from all quarters, basically, on this idea of homeschooling, but I get less of it from younger people, and I get more of it from the middle-aged baby boomers. They really can't grasp that the kids are going to be at home and they're not going to be socialized and this kind of thing.
When I got your email this morning about our topic, I called 2 middle-aged women, baby boomers, because they're a couple years older than I am. I mentioned to them what the topic was going to be, and they immediately started saying socialization. There was no doubt in their mind that, because these are conservative women, the more money that you put into school systems, the less education you get out of it, as far as something that can be positively measured. The Baltimore City school system has the second highest expenditure per student nationwide, and yet we only have 11% of our children can do basic math, and only 15% of them can read at grade level. So there's no doubt in the minds of everybody that's seriously not indoctrinated into some kind of communist worldview that schools don't teach children well. And what has kept parents wedded to the idea of the school system is that they are convinced, as was my mother and still is. My mother was one of these women I call. So she's more than 5 years older than me. Okay, the other one's only 5 years older than me. The socialization, first thing out of their mouth, guaranteed every woman is going to come out with socialization. And one of the aspects of that is working together as a team. Well, my answer to that was, well, then put them on a team. Enroll them,
or have more than one
in a
kid.
little league, right? That's another thing. Have your kids do projects together. But if you look at this response right here, how do they learn to work as a team? There's rarely team building aspects to any classroom setting.
No, it's a institutionalist setting.
Right. And the other thing is you look at the aspects of public schools in places like Baltimore that you're talking about, the second highest expenditure in the country. You don't have a single coach in any of these schools unless it's a magnet school. I have a friend of mine who's a tennis coach at a magnet school. Right. There are no gym classes. There haven't been gym classes in Baltimore for 30 years.
Wow.
My cousin, who's 10 years older than me, actually went to school and got all the qualifications he needed to be a gym teacher and never found a job. He's worked in finance his whole life because basically as soon as he got out of college in the early 1980s, all of the school systems were cutting back on physical education. And this is where, if there's any team building, this is where it is. Right. So that's not something that the school system is concerned with. And if we look at what the first school systems in the United States, the very, very earliest ones were some colleges for elite kids. That's where we get our college and university system from. But where our public primary schools come from was the School for Indian Children in Carlisle, and the panic in white Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture when they found out that Irish immigrants in the 1850s, 40s, and 50s were going to schools that were run and operated by Catholic priests. And they wanted to do everything they could to get papal influences out of the United States. So our two models for public primary schools have to do with destroying the extended family and negating the ethnic and religious culture of the people.
And it's an ongoing process because you start with something that's like a community school. Everybody kind of knows each other. You know your own children, of course, and then you also get to know the peers and the neighborhood kids. And there's still a lot of connection there. But what we have seen is that the process of consolidation in the size of the school district and the consolidation in the curriculum and the management style, to the federal level where you have federal guidelines for how every school should behave, is you have progressively destroyed whatever link there was with the family and with the community.
Oh, and we've spoken before about how the school system sets children back because they have less contact with adults who care about them, and they have more contact with children of their exact same age group who don't know anything they don't know.
Right. Teamwork it doesn't have to be between identical people like in a school setting. Teamwork can be a mentorship. and a parent teaching a child or some other elder teaching a young person, that's very difficult to do when you have a couple dozen students and one teacher.
I can give you 2 examples here of how I think schools, by their design, and I don't know if they're designed for this reason, I suspect they are, by their design they retard emotional intelligence, particularly among young men and boys. When I get men come to me for advice on behavior, they are all high school or college graduates. When I get men that come to me for advice on perspective, they're all high school or college graduates. When I get men who dropped out of school coming to me for advice, Big Ron was one, he just wants to know a better way to punch somebody in the face. Okay? Yeah. He's got an extremely high level of emotional intelligence. He just wants to be able to talk to a kindred spirit and discuss practical ways of disposing of rival males. And I would compare him, and please, Big Ron, don't beat the shit out of me next time we get together, but who I would compare Big Ron to, who, like me, he dropped out of school as soon as he turned 16 so that he could get on with his life, because you could tell it was just a prison for children. He was then working with men at age 16. The same thing I did. I was then working with men. And you learn so much as a young man working with men that are 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years older than you, as opposed to being taught by some woman that's in her middle years. And she's not even sure what kind of sex she likes yet. And she's only like 30, 35 years old. So you're not going to learn anything from this woman. The guy that I would compare Big Ron to, I just got done reading his autobiography, is Malcolm X. Malcolm X was basically expelled from school at age 13. He's a mixed race guy with red hair. Okay, he's not a black dude. You know, he was one of the light skinned black guys that's in the political thick of things because whites will treat him better than they'll treat darker skinned blacks. And this guy became a hustler, in every sense of the word, in the criminal underground in New York, Harlem, in the 1930s and 40s, and spent some 7 years in prison. And then he went right to being a proselytizer for the Nation of Islam. This was a guy that had a level of emotional intelligence that fitted him for the job of converting high school and college educated people to an essentially crackpot mythos that was made up by some guy in Detroit in the 1930s. And he sold this to millions. And I think I'm going to prove in my book review that Malcolm X's outlook on the world is basically the foundation of liberal white American thought right now. If all the things that we talk about, everything that's the matter with these crazy suicidal white people who hate themselves, this guy lays it out in his book. You're talking about a guy who, when he wrote a letter to his sister, she suggested penmanship and English classes to him. He had been the second smartest and second most awarded child in his class for 2 years running in this place in Michigan where he attended school. Out of a reformatory, they sent him to a regular school. He was a highly intelligent guy, but when he was expelled for being, disobedient, he turned his intelligence to actually learning how people operated emotionally and became a master at manipulating that. And I see that with Ron every time we get together. I mean, every time I go out with this dude, it's like every woman in the bar that this is the guy they wish I would just disappear or go in the bathroom and die of a heart attack so they could sit next to Ron. Okay?
Not that bad.
Yeah, it's that bad. And it's because he's consistently demonstrating a high level of emotional intelligence, and he's conversing on a peer basis with a man who looks 20 years older than him, who, I look like I'm old enough to be his father.
And that's just evidence of how powerful this effect is, of the public school effect, that if you have friendships or relationships with people that are more than maybe even 5 years difference, it's kind of, people are shocked by it or surprised. It was to the point where it was unusual to have friends in a different grade, even in high school, when people mix around because of the classes. Even
slave societies understood that you usually shouldn't match up men and women that were the same age as mates.
Yeah.
because physically and emotionally, the females would usually be a little bit ahead of the males. And it takes longer to really mold a male than it does a female in terms of interacting with the society. Because there's a couple different levels he has to be able to operate on. He has to be functional on a household level, and then he has to be able to project himself out into the world. And the girl, you just have to get her functional on a household level. So in traditional societies, you'll see a 2 to 10 year traditional age gap between the male and the female. And part of this would have to do with the mortality of women in childbirth. But I see it in the day to day, and it was one of the things that when the black Muslims were trying to reverse the retardation of African American society, one of the first things they did was try to advocate for a 10-year age gap between the husband and the wife, just to make sure that the husband was going to be mature enough, because these guys are being converted out of prison populations and off the streets, and they're coming out of homes where there wasn't a father, and it just took longer to get the guy up to speed than it did to get the woman up to speed. And in the black Muslim community, there's nothing like the traditional Islamic put down of the woman. Okay.
Oh, there isn't?
No. So you have this. You have a recognition that the woman is weak and the man is strong, but you also have a recognition that the man's not going to be effective in the community unless he respects his mate and in a way treats her like a queen, puts her up on a pedestal. That way her status amongst females will follow along with his status instead of her just being a slave that's invisible. And this is a way that gets the male leader more traction amongst female followers in general. This has led to some problems in the Black Muslim Brotherhood with some of the leaders spreading their seed a little bit too widely.
That's very that happens.
Right. And this tends to happen in religious and newly formed religions. You tend to get that because you've got women coming in really looking for the dominant alpha male, and you've got men coming in trying to learn how to be that guy. Even in early America, the children who were sold into slavery, let's say out of Ireland or England or Scotland, the girls would be released at age 18 and sold off in marriage. And the boys wouldn't be released till they were 21 or 31, because you wanted to have a replacement wife for the guys who are already established, because they usually wore the first wife out. By the time she was 30, she'd be done. She would die in childbirth or wouldn't be able to have children anymore. So there's some brutal practicality to this practice, but it also does kind of recognize the fact that even in a team, and what's more of a team than a husband and a wife and their children? One of the things that makes it an effective team is that the children aren't the same age as the husband and the wife. They're not our clones.
All right.
Okay, so if you want to strengthen it a little bit more and get some more perspective in the relationship, well, take a guy who can reproduce at a later age than a woman can. So that's just a biological truth there, and match him up with a younger woman. So there's more aggregate experience, social knowledge in the family.
Yeah, and a larger extended family web too, because even in that case, the mothers, the wife's parents might be younger and more able to assist in child rearing as grandparents, and reaching up to the father's relations, they'll be older and reaching back even further into the community. And
the father's younger brothers and sisters might be the same age as his wife.
Right.
Might be somebody that could really help out a lot.
Yeah.
And then he would have parents that saw things that nobody in her existing, still surviving family saw. Yeah. Because they would literally be from another time. And if you think about how important that is, to have the perspective of a previous generation, that's always been considered important. It's now no longer considered important in postmodern society. But if you think about it, it's even more important than it originally was, because it brings the perspective from before this social model, and it gives you a way of actually looking at the society in general as something that wasn't always the exact same way.
That's right. And you have a larger set of examples and set of experiences to draw from. And, we're always told that diversity is our strength. And I hate that that word has been ruined, because there needs to be a word for that where you have.
How about chronodiversity?
Chronodiversity, yeah.
Is our strength.
Yeah. Well, it's just one element of it, but it's one that has been discarded, and it's because we have to live in continuous revolution. And we have it's so creepy. I don't know if you've seen. I haven't seen any television coverage, but I've seen some news feeds about these kids that are just so camera ready, and they're on CNN and they're giving interviews and they're being coached by the producers. They have outtake videos that these kids are just simply being told what to say. But now you have people saying that the voting age should be reduced because look how smart these kids are, telling us about gun control when they just emerged from an attack.
We've had a steady reduction of the voting age. We've gone from an electorate that's 35 years old to begin with.
Yeah.
There was a stipulation that you had to own property. There was even a proposal it was either South Carolina or Georgia. In the 1700s, there was a proposal that you couldn't vote unless you owned at least one white man. Now, that didn't get passed, but it was an idea, and the idea was that you couldn't get a vote into running a society unless you were already running part of the society.
Right.
In other words, you understood things like property management and organizing people to get something done before you're allowed to vote. The younger that you can make the vote, the more malleable the vote would be, and the more women that you get into the voting process, the more malleable the vote is in a very specific category where you threaten the security of the population in order to get an outcome in a vote. It's a lot easier to threaten women psychologically and to get them to vote for what they perceive as the safest solution than it is with men.
And this also goes back to the public school system because you are capturing people at the peak of their public school indoctrination where everybody is pretty much forced through the 13 years of schooling at 18 and now you have the right to vote and you know exactly how you should vote, right? Because you've been through this really comprehensive system.
Activism in school. I have had close coaching and friendship and familial relations with 5 people who were Baltimore City school teachers. None of them are Baltimore City school teachers now. Half of them are no longer school teachers. The ones that are have moved to a less violent setting to apply their craft. But what I have found out recently, even in private Catholic schools, the teachers who are no longer nuns, the teachers are actually conducting activism classes on community activism in response to the Freddie Gray riots. There was an all-girls Catholic school that actually staged protests on behalf of Black Lives Matter. This was an almost 100% white student body. The people who donate and the alumni who have donated to school were actually aghast at this situation. And the one teacher that told me about it was very proud that she was leading these girls against police brutality on behalf of these oppressed Black people in the city. Yet she had resigned from teaching in Baltimore City schools because she was being threatened by young Black girls that wanted to beat her up. So they're being trained in activism, basically using Saul Alinsky's tome as a handbook. It's, of course, been fed to them in bits for motivating these children. So you have people right out of university that have been indoctrinated in all the SJW stuff, and they're still in their 20s when they're teaching activism to children.
Yeah,
their
brains aren't fully formed themselves. Yeah.
There's a mandatory public service requirement in Baltimore City and Baltimore County.
Isn't that
for you to get
Orwellian?
Your diploma? Yes, for you to get your diploma, you have to log so many hours of public service. With my son, what I did is, since he helped me coach at a rec center, which was a public facility, it wasn't a private gym, we were able to list that as his community service hours.
Nice. Yeah,
he was horrified at it. And he was like 17 years old. He's like, Dad, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I said, well, this is part of your brainwashing.
I remember the thing now, which is you mentioned that you dropped out and Big Ron dropped out. And I think that it used to be a lot easier to drop out. I think one of the things that is supposedly a progressive improvement is that fewer people drop out and they have all these special programs to keep you in. And I think that's like a safety valve because you didn't belong in there and it wasn't doing anything for you. And I don't know, it would be much worse if for you and for perhaps for the other people in the school if you were to be forced to stay in, right? So I want to ask you that.
Right, I could have been one of these mass killers. If I would have been forced to stay in there until I was 18, I had finally isolated myself from the student body and was just in the library reading.
Right.
When I was 15, 6 months before I dropped out, I actually had a really vicious fight with a man, a 19-year-old guy who was still attending high school.
Oh, wow.
And when I was 15. And this is just going to escalate. Our gym teacher used to let the varsity football players, if you look at the guys that are starting on a high school football team at age 18, and you compare them to the 14-year-old kids who have just come into the high school, you're looking at a man and a boy. Our football coach was also our gym teacher. And in Pennsylvania, in the school systems I went to, junior high school and high school, football coaches and gym teachers were the same thing. Our football coach taught gym and taught health class. I had to learn about gonorrhea from this asshole. Okay? Now, what these guys would do is they would exempt the starting football players from having to attend gym class, but they would give them blanket day passes to be able to go around the school. One of the things they let them do, we used to do dodgeball in gym.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and dodgeball was a great game. Okay, I really thought it was cool. But I'm there as a 15-year-old, and I'm still technically in the 9th grade, so I'm with the 14-year-olds. And this coach, gym teacher, let the varsity football team come in and play dodgeball with us. So you got this 6'5", 220-pound quarterback throwing this volleyball from 15 feet away at these little kids.
Yeah.
Now I was physically a man. I was not of his stature, but I was already a man. And this was one of these guys that was actually, he avoided me. This guy was afraid of me. He just knew I was going to stab him. You could tell when a big dude's looking at a little guy and he's like, this little bastard's going to stab me. Because when we got initiated, when we went in, I never got beat up by the seniors. The school teachers would let the seniors beat up and torture and harass and humiliate the freshmen for the entire first day of school. It was called initiation. This happened to my brother, but it didn't happen to me. And it was because I was already dangerous to adults because I was a 5'8", 145-pound guy I could clean and jerk 155 pounds over my head, and I could bench press 190 pounds, and I could hit harder than most men. And I had a reputation for fighting, so they all left me alone, except for one girl. And I bit her because I didn't want to punch her out in front of these men. In this one gym class, these 18-year-old men are allowed to come into this gym class and throw volleyballs at these little kids. I was part of this group. Now, if you caught the ball, which hurt like hell because these guys would sizzle it into your guts.
Yeah.
This is the guy, he's being scouted for college teams as a quarterback, and he's throwing these balls at 80 miles an hour right at our bellies. Well, I'm catching it. When I'm catching stuff like this because I'm a boxer and I'm physically mature and I can take the pain, but the other kids are literally getting knocked out and dragged off the court. And,
I remember my gym teacher called it slaughter ball, and it was.
Yeah, it should be a competitive thing between guys. Now, in our school, it became a sadistic thing where the same age group of 14-year-old kids are subjected to the torment of this same age group of adults. Now, in a healthy situation, you would have dodgeball and you would have the two most athletic 18-year-olds pick up teams, and they would they would assign positions to the little kids, and they would coach them, and they would look out for them, and they would protect them, and it would be a team. It would be like a family. It would be like a football team where you've got like a quarterback that's served for 10 years, and he's got a running back that it's his first year, and he's kind of like his buddy and his coach, and they're working together. No, there's none of that in school. Everything breaks down the same age in school, and one group is permitted to torment the other group, and it's part of the substructure. It's not official, but it's still a gross aspect of this structure. Now, what I did, and my wife did with me, is we decided that our oldest son would drop out of school to save his life.
Yeah.
The youngest son, we moved to the county to get him into a white school so he wouldn't continually be preyed upon. But typically what has been done in Baltimore City, and this is if you're a white family in Baltimore City and you have a boy and a girl, and I know 3 families that have done this, you do everything you can to send that girl to private school. That's your number one priority. Okay. Right. Otherwise she's going to be turned out by the gangsters in school. And your boy, you pull him out of school as soon as legally feasible. You used to be able to do this when he was 14. Now, in order to get him out of school before he's 16, you've got to get him to commit a crime.
That's insane.
So you get him out of school before that time so he can get expelled. And then what you could do is you can put him through the GED program. My oldest son is 41 years old now, and he's been a refrigeration mechanic for 22 years. Mm-hmm. He's got the same level of experience as a guy that's 3 years older than him that went through high school. So he's ahead of the game. He aced his GED test when he was 16 for the senior year when you're supposed to be 18. Not only did he ace it, he tutored the other kids in his age group.
We've been talking about the social aspects, but the academic aspects is another topic. And it's just as absurd, right? Because you have a kid like him who could have done twice as much in that time and just had his time wasted.
In elementary school, he was the best student in the entire school. I'd have the president and his teachers would come to me and shake my hand and congratulate me.
Wow.
Okay, that's how good he was, but he ended up intentionally earning D's so that he could seek the protection of the tough white kids, because his friends were really the black nerds, the geeks, the highly intelligent black kids, but they couldn't protect him against the thugs. So he had to align himself. In fact, his best friend, I've written a lot about this guy named Dante.
Yeah.
You know, it basically goes into a redneck bar, knocks out 10 dudes, and walks out with the only 2 girls that are there. That was his best friend.
Yeah.
Okay, so
he was not a scholar.
Right. Yeah, Dante was not a scholar. Okay, he was a scholar of the fist. Okay, so you have, to this day, if he gets a work order or a contract, he'll take it to my oldest son to read it. Okay, well, what does this mean?
Yeah.
Okay, and if there's a security problem, if my oldest son is worried about protection or anything, he could call up Dante and not have to worry about things. So that's a rare example of same group luck, where these kids were the same age and they got sandwiched into the same thing. And what was the basis for the relationship? Dante is this tanned Italian stud who looks like he could be an action movie star. Mm-hmm. And my son Vance is 50 pounds lighter at the same weight. He's almost white. I still haven't met a white person, but this kid was almost white, and he had straw blonde hair. He had straw blonde hair when he was a little kid, and he still, as a 41-year-old man, he still has very blonde hair. This is like the whitest, skinniest, smartest kid in his class. He gets together with the toughest, swarthiest Dago street fighter in his class, okay? And so what do? They become strong because they're opposites coming together, just like a man and a woman become strong and they form a family because they're opposites coming together. And everything about our school system is set up to make sure that Dante and Vance never become best friends. So, but they did, and it was just luck.
I've read that teachers actually work to disrupt those friendships when they can, especially in the elementary levels. Yeah, that they will split them up and put them in different classes in the following year to try to disrupt those friendships.
they're supposed to go on different tracks. And when I first met Dante, I hated him because I was a chaperone on their school trip to Washington, D.C., and this kid wouldn't stand still. He wouldn't listen to me for shit. Well, when I met his father, I understand that I wasn't much of a threat. His father was a dude that actually killed people for the mob. Okay?
I've read about the family that they...
Right.
Yeah, because, tell us about why... I never understood this, that they had to, if they wanted milk, they had to, like, fight for the milk in the refrigerator or something?
Okay. Before the boys were allowed to eat, they had to fight each other or fight Dad.
Every day?
Yeah. Okay. Now, put it this way, when the first time I was together with a family get-together, Bano starts pinching me. He's like, dude, I can't even pinch a half inch on you. You're so lean. I bet you can move pretty good. I mean, man, fighting you for 10 minutes would be better than fucking a woman because, I mean, you'd be hard to catch. But when I got you, I'm like, dude, okay, let's not box, okay? You know, I mean, this guy got an orgasm when he ran into me because I seemed to be like his perfect counterpart. He's already eyeing me up for, like, you know, to be his wingman, going out and beating people up.
Oh my gosh.
Because I was smart and I was quick and I was small. And this guy was strong enough. He pulled an engine block out of 71 Chevelle. With like one hand, with the other hand on the frame. Okay. So he's like a Rocky Marciano type. Now, the first time I was there, his brother, who was this really big fat dude, was teasing Dante, and Dante's 8 years old. And Bano's letting this happen. Well, eventually, Dante gets really sick of getting these noogies on his head. So he looks over his shoulder at his dad, and Bano gives him the nod, the okay nod. Okay, he kicks his Uncle Tommy in the balls with a front snap kick. And then he punches him. I forget where he punches him now. Then he does like an elbow to the temple or something and knocks him out.
He was 8 years old. Yeah,
he's 8 years old, weighed about 75 pounds, and he knocks out this 350-pound piece of shit on the living room floor in front of me. And Tommy comes to, and Bano just looks down to him. He said, I told you not to fuck with my kids, Tommy. Because Tommy's the younger brother. Well, and then he turns to Dante. He says, go get yourself a beer. The kid's like 8. Right? So he's like got this Pavlovian conditioning thing for his children. Well, it turned out that I end up becoming the mentor of all 3 of his sons while he's in prison.
Oh.
Now, he was really pissed off about this because he was afraid I was going to teach him how to fight fair. So I'm on the phone after he's been out of prison for a while, and his oldest son, Miguel, hasn't been over to see me in a while. A heavyweight kid who just learned how to box so he could defend himself against the mobs of black kids that attacked him in school. And this was the same school that was the last school that Big Ron went to, the Harford Academy.
Mm-hmm.
Being the only white guy in a school that's basically a penitentiary for violent offenders is not very cool. But this dude literally knocked out crowds of kids. He just like Ron, he gets expelled from school for successfully defeating groups of larger, older black aggressors. Now, he's missing the sparring thing. So he calls me up. His dad's back from prison. I realized that when his dad got out of prison, these kids weren't going to allow to get boxing lessons anymore because Bano was going to be over there teaching them how to rip out eyes, rip testicles up and down people, and while you were checking for the cops and all this kind of shit. He didn't want my egalitarian boxing getting in the way. Miguel was on the phone with me, and then I remember I was sitting eating pasta at dinner when he calls me, and I'm talking to him, and then I hear this crash bang, and the phone goes dead. Now, I knew what their dining room and their kitchen looked like. They only had one piece of furniture other than milk crates, and it was a giant electrical spool that they used for a dining room table that was between the dining room and the kitchen. And
there was no wife in this, or mom?
There was a mother-in-law. Bano made her live out in his dad's RV, okay, after his dad passed away. But, yeah, there was no wife there. She'd escaped with a daughter and the youngest son.
Wow.
Okay, partially because my wife and I actually had custody of a couple of the kids while he was in prison, and she was in hiding at the House at the Roof. He headbutted her in the face. That's why he went to prison. It wasn't because he climbed the side of the school building and took his kids out through the second-story window.
Oh, that's the same guy. Oh, man.
Yeah. Then he got arrested, and he was like trying to kill the cops and stuff like that, But anyhow, Dante calls me back and he says, "Sorry about that, Mr. Jim." He said, "But when I was talking to you, I was standing in front of the refrigerator. I was finishing off the last of the gallon of milk. These guys all drank out of the milk jug."
Yeah.
Okay. All right. There wasn't like a glass or a cup in there. He said, "But my dad saw me and it wasn't dinner time yet, and I was finishing the last of the milk, and he dove over the electrical spool. He tackled me. He stuck my head in the lettuce crisper, and then he stood on my chest while he finished drinking the gallon."
Oh my God.
Right. So that's Joe Bananas, or how I called him in writing, Bano.
Yeah.
Who was a veteran of Vietnam, fought in the 101st Air Assault Unit, and had some terrible times in his life. But this is how he raised his kids. And you know what? His boys are all successful.
Yeah.
As brutal as this was, they learned something real from him, and they all ran from their schooling as much as they could. These kids own businesses.
Right.
Okay? I mean, that's it. And when I ran into Dante at my grandson's christening, which is the baptism for a Catholic kid, we kind of we like them to be old enough to at least cry and scream when we baptize them. And I walk in there and I see Dante sitting next to this beautiful petite blonde who looks like she swallowed 2 basketballs. And I look down and he looks at her. He said, "This is my adopted father." He said, "When my old man was in prison, this guy took care of me, and he played with us. He was a really cool guy." And then he pats her on the belly, and he looks up at me. He said, "Go ahead, Mr. Jen. Tell her what kind of devil spawn she's got inside." Okay. So obviously, this is not a relationship that's going to last for long. I mean, she fell for the fact that this was the kind of dude that women are wired to desire because, I mean, he is what he is, but she can't maintain a long-time relationship with him, and she has custody. But this guy he's in a biker gang as the guy that's supposed to beat people up. But whatever he's doing, when he's got his daughter with him, he tells all the guys to go to hell.
Yeah.
He puts her up in a dress and he takes her out to a restaurant and he takes pictures and puts it up on Facebook. And he's like the princess and her daddy. He'll make posts like this on Facebook. And so this guy is a doting father. He's a successful businessman. He's also been successful working for other people. His larger brother is a quieter version. His younger brother has a family. He's actually a white man that's reproducing.
Wow.
And part of this was the fact that they were Italian Americans, and they always his father at least identified as an Italian American. And he said, you're not just one of these sissy white people. You're you got fighting genes in you. You got me in you, and you can't forget that. There you go. You've got 3 guys that are successful who had a savage for a father. They had a good mother who did her best to get them through school and help tutor them. And they had a father that taught them that you stood up.
Right.
You didn't just eat the man's shit. Okay. You didn't just let the pet.
I think what this story illustrates, it's a bit of a digression, but it shows that kids are really resilient, and from any outside perspective, that would be kind of a horrifying upbringing. But it works for the family, right? If your dad is like that, maybe that's what you need in childhood from a genetic perspective.
You think about it. His daughter is 6 years old now. He's no longer beating up like 10 dudes at one time or anything like that. He tries to avoid fights. He's no longer beating up his employees for stealing his tools. 10 years from now, some young bug man who wants to date his daughter is going to have to meet this guy.
That's right.
Okay? And you know what? And she's probably going to be attracted to like really macho types of guys. Well, that's a mixed bag. Sometimes that guy's a criminal that's got bad habits. He might beat you or something. Again, she's got a dad that until he's on a respirator in a hospital bed, he's going to be a man to be feared.
Yeah.
And he's always going to be her protector, and he'd lay down his life for her. She's always got that in her back pocket.
And that's nothing you can get from anybody else besides family.
If you think about it, the women of my generation that got married in their 70s in working class Maryland and Pennsylvania, most of them were beaten by their husbands. And all of their fathers were convinced that it wasn't their duty to do anything about this. Their daughters were afraid their father would try to do something about it for fear that he would get locked up. And then they all end up turning to the state to protect them from potentially abusive mates, and you get what we have. And it's because these girls didn't have Dante as a dad.
Yeah.
Basically is what it came down to.
Yeah, or Bano.
Right. So he was coming home to his kids one day, in case nobody's read Logic of Steel. He had $3 left in his pocket. He just got done smoking pot, getting high in this basement in this ghetto portion of Baltimore on Charles Street, where the door comes out into the basement of a stairwell. And he walks out there, and he's so paranoid, he takes so much time making sure that he looks like he isn't vigilant. So this guy gets a jump on him. He's in the stairwell, and there's this tall black guy in a trench coat holding a switchblade out to the right and holding his hand out to the left and saying, "Come on, white boy, give me your money." And Bano gives him something, but it's not his money. Okay. He stabs the dude in the heart 3 times, and then he walks out of the stairway. And the next thing he does is he goes to the 5 and 10 store to get a pack of peanut brittle so he can satisfy his munchies. So this is a successful alcohol and marijuana defense against a heroin attack. This is basically what this was. He gets the peanut brittle, he eats it, and the next thing he can think of is his kids. I haven't seen the kids in a while. He goes home and he wakes the kids up at like 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and he's playing with the kids. I hope he never told me he washed his hands after he was done shanking this guy.
I was thinking that, yeah.
I hope he washed his hands, but I wouldn't bet on it, okay?
Yeah.
He didn't even read the newspaper to see if they found a body on Charles Street. He didn't care. All he cared about was his kids. He disposes of the enemy, and the first thing he thinks of after he fills his belly with what was on his mind before he got attacked was to go home to his kids.
Yeah.
He didn't even wake up his wife. After that, he needed to go home and make sure that he spent some time with his kids. It probably had to do with, to a certain extent, he didn't say it, but I would have to think it had somewhat to do with the fact that he was afraid maybe he wasn't going to see his kids again for a while.
Yeah.
So you'll get that out of criminals, but you will not often see that out of a guy that is making 6 figures buying a nice house for his minimalized family.
To me, it's not that I advocate Bano's style of parenting.
No?
No.
You prude.
This podcast does not advocate beating your children over milk to drink the milk first. Or any of the other stuff. But the point that I'm trying to make and how I see Bano and his family is that a family, even this totally insane family, is better than the public school. That's how it looks to me. Especially for people who are outliers like Dante and your son, who is, so smart but not equipped to defend against all the other psychos there, and that the school just can't substitute for the family, even wacky families. Yeah,
and it's pretty bad when the only thing that can save you from the school system is a wacky family.
Right, yeah.
The one lady I've interviewed a lot, Megan, when she was 12 years old, she went to Hamilton Middle School, the same school that Big Ron went to, the same school that my oldest son went to. And it was the end of all of their educations. They all ended up not making it the rest of the way through school based on the experience they had in Hamilton Middle School, which is a block and a half in an L-shaped walk from where I sit right now. And the first thing that happened to her is she gets punched in the face by some black girl that's twice her size, and she got something taken away from her. And her sister, who is a nut, her sister shows up at the school and threatens to beat up the principal and invites her biker friends to roll up at the school when all the black kids are getting on the buses ready to go back to the ghetto. And the bikers let them all know, okay, you're not going to continue to beat our little sisters up here, or we'll be back.
Yeah.
Okay. And your daddy ain't here. It's you and me. And that's like the last gasp of working class identity in Baltimore. It happened right there at that scene, a block and a half from where I sit, where you got a bunch of bikers who were criminals rolling up to defend a 12-year-old girl who the principal of her school refuses to defend. They didn't even suspend or expel the girl that beat her up, because it happens so much. If they suspended and expelled all these kids, they'd have to listen to the higher ups. The city government is paying a lot of money to have these 3 city buses bus these kids from the worst ghetto in West Baltimore
Right.
out to this working class neighborhood in Northeast Baltimore. And if those buses show up empty one day because all these kids have been suspended or expelled, there's going to be hell to pay. If you're in control, if you're trying to keep a lockdown on society, you have to punish the Caucasian kids at a higher rate than you punish any of the other kids for the same violent offenses, because as history illustrates, this is the group of people who succeeded in overthrowing more governments than any other group of people in history. Between the 1700s and the 1800s, almost every government that existed on the face of the earth was overthrown by small bodies of white men, often mercenaries, adventurers, guys that didn't even have government sanction. If you go farther back and you look at Cortez and Pizarro, you got 150 white gangsters out of Estradamora. They're showing up in some nation that has 10 million people and overthrowing it. This is a deep fear that is embedded in the heart of any government organism, that one day that you're going to have more than one of these guys is going to rise up. So there's a real threat. When one black dude goes off in Baltimore and he goes crazy and starts attacking people, for the most part, the cops stand around and laugh at him until he gets exhausted, and then the one with the best social skills talks to him until he starts to cry. This is a guy that's been he's been trained by his mother, because he doesn't have a father. He's been trained to act out emotionally, where the instinct of the man, usually the male youth who is ostracized and has a violent potential, his instinct is to stay insular. And if he has any coaching from an uncle, let's say Big Ron or me or somebody, the first thing we're going to tell him is don't run your mouth, don't go public, be quiet, strike when nobody's expecting. Now, how hard is it going to be to take this propensity and maybe a little bit of advice from an uncle that did some time in prison is the only guy that listened to you about all the black kids beating you up at school? How hard is it going to be for some guy from a government agency to pretend to be friends with this kid and say, hey, I know where you could buy a gun, or I could explain to you how to break into your father's gun locker, and get his gun, or whatever it is,
Yep.
and you decide, and maybe you'll be an important person after all. Who knows? But when you have these emasculated youths out there, and if they're youths that haven't been raised by women to act out like women, then you've got time bombs clicking, just like you had at Columbine.
Yeah.
Those kids that were killed at Columbine, a lot of those kids picked on those guys that killed them.
Mm.
And now in the 1970s, when there would be a maniac like me who would beat up these kids one by one and vent that way and keep it from driving me nuts. Well, if you're now in a society where dad never got you a punching bag and you don't know how to fight and all you're taught is you got to go along to get along, well, if that rage ends up popping off, you don't have the ability to go out there and beat up the captain of the wrestling team. The first thing Dante did when he went back to Baltimore, he was living with his father while his father was helping supervise the harvesting of the marijuana crop out in Arizona. The first thing Dante did when he got to Parkville Senior High, he looks like a stud, but he didn't join the wrestling team. And all the bullies in the school belonged to the wrestling team. The team captain and these two other dudes walk up to Dante and they threaten him. And Dante punches this guy in the chest and cracked his breastbone in half.
Whoa. God.
And he did this to a 180-pound wrestler, and Dante was a 135-pound guy who had actually won the state title in Arizona for wrestling in his age and weight group. Okay, but his first instinct is, boom, you're done. See you later. Go to the hospital. I'm glad to get suspended. I got 3 days off. I can go hang out with, the lonely housewife next door, who's looking at me all the time while I'm cutting my mom's lawn with my shirt off. So that doesn't exist anymore. That guy like Dante or the psycho loner like me, they're no longer out there. And the person who is then bullied by these people in school is now going to be a kid that's got no recourse but go to a gun or something and try to get his revenge that way.
then they glorify these guys and make a hero out of them, or at least an infamous character out of them, and I think that contributes to it also.
There's these heroes on both sides. You got the Christian sacrificial heroes on the one side,
the martyrs,
who are the jocks that picked on these kids all along. They become heroes, and then these psycho goth kids become heroes to the counterculture. People have this desire to make martyrs out of whatever mess they've got, so that's going to happen. But I think it's built into the systemization. If you don't have a vent for these guys, if they don't have a football coach or a boxing coach, you're not allowed to have a boxing coach in school anymore.
No.
The guy who's going to be a master at helping these kids get through the psychological issues is going to be the boxing coach, who's an amateur psychologist to begin with.
Yeah.
That's all you do. When you're coaching competition level guys, you're just a psychologist. Mr. Frank would have somebody like me help Tony work on his jab, but Mr. Frank just talks to Tony about not thinking about his job when he's in the ring, and how to talk to his wife so she doesn't get upset and stuff like that.
Because it's partly because of scale, because the schools are too large. There's no one person that could be connected to any of the kid. In fact, that's discouraged. You've taken away authority. You've taken away any kind of personal judgment or authority to replace it with rules and managerial bureaucracy. And you've centralized the curriculum and centralized everything that these people are supposed to think and do. So you've just destroyed at every step any chance for this person to be intercepted by something that could help him.
You could take his most negative impulses and turn them into something positive. And that's the key to helping a young male become a man, is to turn that corner and to take his darkest trigger and turn it into something bright. Part of that's going to be helping him cultivating a personality that will allow him to meet the right woman down the road.
And that's been proposed too, is that having single gender schools would alleviate this problem because of the need to save face in front of women or impress women.
There's less toxicity. I coached for a private boys Catholic high school, and it was the only place where you were allowed to have an MMA program in Baltimore was at a private boys Catholic high school. That's it. And this was a vehicle for the Lumsden brothers and Damian Kessel and myself and other guest coaches to be mentors to these young men. I remember a guy that I trained in stick sparring when he was 17 and 18. 5 years later, I got my finger broke. It was a really bad break. I'm in Dr. Lumsden's office, and who steps in as an intern but this young man, Brian Fiorta, who I trained as a stick fighter when he was a kid. Wow. And now he's a young man, and he's taking notes while Dr. Lumsden is examining my hand. Yeah. And so you have this mentoring system all the way through. There was another kid who I trained, and he's now a physical therapist for professional athletes. And he also worked as an intern in the same office, and I met him again when I was getting a broken bone attended to in the same office. So you end up with this full circle chain where these guys go from being the kid that you're teaching to the guy that's taking care of you. And you end up with a kind of a family circle that comes to that. And if they're competing over the same pool of women, young women, in a high school setting, in a co-ed setting, then they don't have the capacity to really concentrate as much on these manly pursuits, which in the end makes them even more attractive to women. None of these guys have any trouble meeting young ladies. It beats the heck out of these guys getting upset, and in some way, there's something about the school system that's toxic. For instance, when I was in 7th grade at Lock Raven Elementary School in Baltimore County, there was a kid who called this sissy teacher by his nickname. He had some nickname, and the teacher didn't appreciate being addressed outside of his proper first and last name in class. And he sentenced this kid he was kind of a nice, easygoing kid. And the first thing he ever did to try to get along with all the other kids was to call this teacher by his nickname. It had something to do with like his blonde curly hair. We called him Curly or something like that. And the teacher sentenced him to write the teacher's proper 3-part name 26,000 times.
What?
26,000 times. Okay, so what we did is the whole class organized on recess, And I was at this point, I'm not totally alienated. Okay, I was now a guy that nobody picked on, and they hadn't ostracized me yet. There were a couple of friends, because I was good in gym class. I had a couple of friends, and the girls kind of liked me because I already went through puberty and I looked like a man and I sounded like a man. So it was not an ostracized situation for me. So I participated in a protest activity, which was not a protest. And if any of the alt-right guys should listen to this. We didn't protest. We didn't go to the principal's office or anything like that. That's stupid. That's sissified. What we did is we went, the ones of us that got detention, we stole a bunch of loose leaf paper from the vice principal's office. The best thing about the vice principal's office, you got access to a lot of stationery and equipment you could steal. So we stole a bunch of loose leaf paper from the office, and everybody took 50 sheets, and we started writing this asshole's name. Well, it didn't take him long to figure out, okay, he's getting like 1,000 sheets every day. This is going to be over in a month. This isn't going to be a whole semester of hell for this kid. He went to the principal, and he actually ended up humiliating himself because the principal was of the opinion, you can't find anything better for this kid to do than to write your name 26,000 times?
Well, this illustrates the one positive aspect, I think, which is when you develop that team spirit by ganging up against the authority. And this is what
and that's the best you can do.
Yeah, that's the best you can do. But this is what it's the risk of having a large family, too, because my brothers and I did some of that against my parents.
Well, my brother and I did it, too.
Yeah.
I remember my brother recruiting me as a hitter. He's like, "You think you could take Ted yet?" I was like, "Okay, we're calling Dad Ted now, so things have gotten pretty bad." And I said, "You know what? I know I could get the drop on him, and I know I hit hard, but man, he outweighs me by like 80 pounds. I don't know." Right? Yeah, but this is the best you get when you have a system.
Yeah.
What brought us apart with my brother and I resenting our father so much? We never saw him. Have a beef together. Our mother manages it the wrong way because she's a woman, not a man. He's not at home. We see him on the weekends. And when he comes home, she can't wait to go to him and complain. Yeah. Like she's our sister or babysitter and we didn't obey her, and she wants him to put all these rules on us, and now we resent him. Well, this all comes because of this type of atomization that is in the design of the American public school.
It is. Rules over judgment.
Yeah, and the best you get is cohesion fighting the authority. When my brother and I, actually, we don't end up beating up our father. We end up beating up each other eventually. And he tackles me, and I go through this wall that my father had just built in the basement.
Oh, no.
And we actually learned how to become brothers when we were instantaneously overcome by guilt and fear. And we looked at each other, and we decided we were going to have to become drywall operators very quick. He was going to work in like 3 hours. It was Friday, and we were actually going to see him.
Yeah.
And we worked together trying to put this wall back together. So, and you only get that, like Dante and my son, you only get it when things are going so wrong that every once in a while a pair or a group of these kids get together and they act out in desperation.
Right.
And that's the thing you get, the team spirit. I can't wait to hear the episode where your daughters revolt against you and they tie you to the chair like Lilliputians tying Gulliver's sister down on the beach. And we can hear them take over the podcast.
It's probably a few years off. Yeah.
It's going to take a while, right? My brother and I did this to our babysitter one time, which is my older cousin Phyllis. She's babysitting us when she's 16, and we knew that all men found her desirable, okay? She's in her little hot pants, her cut-off jeans, and her green tube top, reading a romance novel in the lounge chair out front, and she's 16, all the college guys next door are having a crab feast in the yard next door. So we took the rubber garden hose and we ran around her like two little Indians. We were like 10 years old. We tied her to this lounge chair and we started throwing the Frisbee at her face.
Oh.
Okay. While she was telling us that our dad was going to whoop us for this, right?
Yeah.
And dudes next door even threw the Frisbee back to us.
Oh. that's awful.
Right. Yeah, so that was like our little revolt. That was the only time our dad really hit us. He spanked us both for that. He's like, that's my
You
little
deserved
niece.
it.
That's it. You can't do this kind of thing to my little niece. Sorry,
Yeah.
It's time for you guys to get spanked. But that's another example of this solidarity coming out of this tyranny.
Yeah. Well, we've gone kind of far afield, but I think that the point is that there's so many pathological aspects to our public school system and our bureaucratic and managerial type of life that we have that almost anything is going to be better at this point, I think, than sending kids to public school.
If you think about it, why did I get kicked out of classes in my last year of high school, which is my third year repeat in ninth grade? I got kicked out because I brought books from the school library to that class.
Yeah.
And the mere fact of me reading these books challenged the teacher's authority.
Yeah.
So it was never about me learning.
No, it's not.
These teachers, all four of my teachers, or it was five of them, they should have all gotten together in some kind of real community environment. They would have all gotten together and they would have said, okay, he's a weirdo. How can we work with him?
Yeah.
Which one of us is going to be the lead? Okay, we'll just send him to your class every day because he can learn under you, but he's got this authority thing with the rest of us.
All right.
Something like that would come up. But once you build a system like this that's just designed to alienate and deracinate, okay,
Yeah.
and break down religion
and not educate.
Yeah, this is what you got.
Yeah.
Sorry for getting into all that weird stuff, but
No, it was good. I didn't want to focus on the shooting. I think lots of people are covering that, so we didn't need to. I wanted to focus on everything else around it, and I think we did.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Lynn.
You're welcome.
Why don't the listeners and I let you attend to your blooming rebellion back then? I think in about 15 minutes, they're actually going to be throwing pencils on your desk.
They're doing fine. They've created some kind of game. I don't run the TV. I wouldn't anyway during a podcast, but I feel that boredom is something they need to struggle with. Not boredom, but they need to come up with their own activities. I always say if we lived on a farm, we would all have work to do all day long. But most of what you do in the suburban life is try not to wreck your house. I feel like so. Make them go outside or find some game that they can play. But the house is wrecked always after a podcast, so that's okay too.
All right.
They can wreck it.
I just got permission from my daughter-in-law and my oldest son to dig up a portion of their backyard to make a play area for my granddaughter and grandson.
Good. Yeah, that'll be nice.
Okay, so make little roads. We'll make a platform for her baby doll castle, and we'll make trench lines for his army men, and we'll have a good time.
That'll be outstanding. All right, well, that was episode 27. Thanks a lot, everybody. Crackpot Podcast, LaFond and Lockhart. See you next time.
We'll meet again under the sun. Every 12 minutes and another one's gone. This meat's in your makeup, this flesh is on your lips. That's a nuclear warhead.